The landscape of immigration at the United States border is undergoing a profound transformation. Set aside the familiar imagery of individuals merely navigating fences. The reality today is far more complex and perilous. Migrants are now undertaking extraordinary journeys, braving treacherous jungles, unforgiving oceans, and traversing entire continents, all in a desperate bid to reach the U.S. threshold. This phenomenon isn't confined to neighboring nations. It's a global tide, drawing people from corners of the world you might least expect. But what truly compels someone to embark on such a hazardous path? Why face the terrifying prospects of cartel violence, the dangers of collapsing bridges, or the menace of crocodile-infested rivers? The motivations run deeper than simple economics. They stem from circumstances so dire back home that risking everything seems the only viable option. The top countries fueling this unprecedented surge might shatter your preconceived notions. It's a narrative woven from desperation, resilience, and the sheer will to survive against overwhelming odds. Numerous events have unfolded across the globe, painting a complex picture of our current world. We're diving deep into the data, the human stories, and the geopolitical undercurrents driving these massive movements. Stay with us as we meticulously uncover the multifaceted reality behind the headlines. If you recognize the importance of understanding these critical global dynamics, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that like button. Your support genuinely empowers us to continue bringing these essential, often overlooked stories to light. We will meticulously explore the nations contributing most significantly to the flow of undocumented individuals towards the United States, revealing the stark truths frequently obscured by simplified narratives. We'll examine the situation country by country, analyzing the specific pressures and dangers compelling people to leave, culminating in comprehensive conclusions at the end of this in-depth analysis. Kicking off our examination, perhaps predictably, is Mexico. For decades, Mexico has been the primary source of undocumented immigration to the United States, a proximity often masking the complexities of the decision to leave. But the methods employed by migrants have drastically evolved, moving far beyond the relatively simpler act of slipping under fences. Imagine the harrowing experience of trekking through blazing, sun-scorched deserts where temperatures soar and water is scarce. Picture the claustrophobic terror of concealing oneself inside sweltering, airless tractor trailers, hoping desperately to evade detection. Envision the daunting challenge of attempting to scale imposing 30-foot steel walls, armed with nothing more than raw hope and sheer determination. These aren't abstract scenarios. They are the lived realities for countless individuals undertaking this perilous journey. Official estimates, such as those from the Pew Research Center, consistently place the number of undocumented immigrants originating from Mexico within the United States at over 5 million. Specifically around 5.2 million in recent years, making them the largest single group by a significant margin. However, the reasons compelling this migration are becoming increasingly severe. It's not solely about seeking economic opportunity anymore. Entire towns, particularly in certain regions, have effectively fallen under the oppressive sway of powerful drug cartels, transforming once familiar communities into zones of fear and lawlessness. Extortion, known locally as piso, or floor tax, isn't merely a threat. It has become a routine, often weekly, cost of existence for small business owners and even ordinary families. The grim choices presented to many, especially young men, often boil down to joining a criminal gang, paying crippling protection fees they cannot afford, or facing deadly consequences, including violence against themselves or their loved ones. Faced with such impossible and terrifying options, it's understandable why countless individuals feel compelled to look north, undertaking immense risks for a chance at safety and a future free from pervasive violence and coercion. The journey itself is fraught with danger, navigating not only natural elements, but also the predatory landscape created by smugglers and cartels who often control the routes. The situation in Mexico is undeniably stark, representing the largest single flow of undocumented migration to the U.S., but it's merely the opening chapter in a much broader global story. Stick with us as we delve deeper and uncover more surprising sources of migration, revealing nations far removed geographically, yet experiencing pressures that drive their citizens on equally perilous journeys. The full picture is far more intricate and geographically diverse than commonly perceived. And remember, we'll be drawing crucial conclusions from this comprehensive analysis at the very end, so make sure to watch the entire video to grasp the complete context. Venturing further south, we encounter Guatemala, ranking consistently high among the nations sending migrants northward. While economic hardship and poverty are significant drivers, mirroring struggles across much of Central America, the situation in Guatemala is compounded by pervasive and often unchecked gang violence. For many Guatemalans, particularly those in impoverished urban neighborhoods or neglected rural areas, the American dream is less about prosperity and more about escaping a nightmare. Imagine raising children in an environment where stray bullets are a daily concern, where teenagers are aggressively recruited by ruthless gangs like Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, or Barrio 18, and where refusing recruitment can mean death for the individual or their family. This isn't hyperbole. It's the grim reality painted by numerous human rights reports and migrant testimonies. While the desire for better-paying jobs certainly exists, the overwhelming factor pushing many to flee is the sheer lack of personal safety. According to border apprehension data, nearly 300,000 Guatemalans were encountered attempting to cross into the U.S. in the fiscal year 2023 alone. Among them are mothers carrying toddlers strapped tightly to their backs, navigating treacherous terrain for weeks. There are also unaccompanied minors, teenagers barely old enough to understand the geopolitical forces shaping their destiny, walking thousands of miles, often alone and terrified, prey to smugglers, traffickers, and the elements. They walk through Mexico, facing dangers from corrupt officials and criminal organizations, all because the fear of staying outweighs the fear of leaving. The journey often involves crossing rivers, mountains, and enduring extreme conditions, sometimes relying on smugglers known as coyotes, whose reliability and intentions are never guaranteed. The decision to leave is born of desperation, a calculation where the known dangers of home, the gangs, the extortion, the absence of state protection in many areas, feel more certain and deadly than the unknown perils of the journey north. This constant threat transforms migration from a choice into a perceived necessity for survival. Continuing our exploration of Central America, we arrive at Honduras, another nation grappling with conditions that compel its citizens to seek refuge elsewhere. Much like its neighbors, Honduras suffers from deep-seated poverty and lack of economic opportunity. However, the situation is acutely exacerbated by rampant gang violence and some of the highest homicide rates in the world outside of active war zones. Life in many Honduran communities is dictated by the pervasive influence of powerful maras, criminal organizations like MS-13 and Barrio 18, which originated in Los Angeles, but have established deep and violent roots back in Central America. These gangs don't just control territory, they control lives. Extortion is widespread, impacting everyone from bus drivers to small shopkeepers. Refusing to pay the war tax, as it's often called, can lead to immediate and brutal retaliation. Businesses are forced to close, families are threatened, and individuals are often killed for defiance. The state's ability to protect its citizens is severely limited, particularly in marginalized neighborhoods where police presence is minimal or, in some documented cases, corrupted. This creates a vacuum where gangs operate with near impunity. For many Hondurans, the daily reality is a constant state of fear. Parents worry about their children being forcibly recruited into gangs or becoming victims of violence simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The only perceived escape routes often lead north. Data from 2023 shows that over 200,000 Hondurans were apprehended at the U.S. border. Again, this figure only represents those encountered. Countless others make it through undetected or become victims along the perilous route. Think about the sheer desperation required to make such a journey. It often involves traversing multiple countries, including Guatemala and Mexico, facing the same dangers encountered by migrants from those nations: robbery, assault, kidnapping by cartels or corrupt officials, and the physical toll of walking hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. What must life be like if enduring these horrific risks feels preferable, safer even, than staying in your own home? It speaks volumes about the breakdown of safety and the rule of law within Honduras, pushing ordinary people towards extraordinary, life-threatening measures in search of basic security. Next on our list is El Salvador, a country presenting a unique and evolving migration narrative. For years, El Salvador was synonymous with extreme gang violence, boasting some of the highest murder rates globally, primarily driven by the same powerful maras plaguing Honduras and Guatemala. However, the situation has undergone a dramatic shift under President Nayib Bukele's controversial, but, according to government figures, effective crackdown on gangs. Through mass arrests and the suspension of certain civil liberties under a prolonged state of emergency, Bukele's government claims to have drastically reduced homicide rates and dismantled gang control in many communities. Yet, migration from El Salvador continues, albeit driven by a shifting set of fears and circumstances. While the immediate threat of gang violence may have subsided for some, the crackdown itself has generated new anxieties. Human rights organizations report widespread arbitrary detentions, lack of due process, and inhumane prison conditions, leading some to fear the state apparatus as much as they once feared the gangs. Families worry about loved ones being swept up in mass arrests with little recourse. Furthermore, the underlying economic issues that contributed to gang proliferation, poverty, lack of jobs, inequality, persist. The focus on security, while potentially improving safety in some aspects, hasn't necessarily translated into broad economic relief or opportunity for the majority of the population. As a result, many Salvadorans still feel compelled to leave. Over 150,000 Salvadorans were intercepted at the U.S. border in 2023. While lower than the peaks seen during the height of gang warfare, it remains a substantial number, indicating ongoing pressures. These migrants often speak of a lack of future prospects, fearing both potential entanglement in the government's security measures and the persistent struggle to make a living. They join the northward flow, facing the familiar dangers of the Central American route. It's a complex situation where the solution to one crisis, gang violence, has arguably created different forms of hardship and fear, demonstrating that addressing security without tackling root economic and social issues may simply alter, rather than halt, the impetus for migration. The narrative of El Salvador highlights how the reasons for leaving can be multifaceted and change rapidly in response to political and social shifts within a country. Shifting our focus to South America, we confront the profound crisis emanating from Venezuela. Once the wealthiest nation on the continent, buoyed by vast oil reserves, Venezuela has descended into a humanitarian catastrophe marked by economic collapse, political repression, and a breakdown of basic services. This isn't just a downturn, it's a societal unraveling. Hyperinflation has rendered the currency virtually worthless, wiping out savings and making everyday goods unaffordable for millions. Hospitals lack basic medicines, equipment, and even running water. Treatable illnesses become death sentences. Essential utilities like electricity and water are sporadic at best in many regions. Food shortages are chronic, leading to widespread malnutrition, particularly among children. Supermarkets frequently display empty shelves, and finding basic staples requires either exorbitant sums or connections. Alongside the economic devastation, political dissent is harshly suppressed under the government of Nicolás Maduro. Opposition figures, journalists, and activists face persecution, imprisonment, or are forced into exile. This combination of economic despair and political oppression has triggered one of the largest displacement crises in modern history. According to UN figures, over 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country in recent years, seeking refuge primarily in neighboring South American nations, but increasingly undertaking the long and hazardous journey north to the United States. In 2023 alone, over 334,000 Venezuelans were encountered at the U.S. southern border, a number that has exploded dramatically, showcasing the severity of the crisis. What's particularly striking is that many Venezuelan migrants are not from the poorest segments of society. A significant portion includes middle-class professionals, engineers, teachers, nurses, people who once had stable lives, salaries, and homes, now reduced to selling everything they own to escape. Their journey is exceptionally arduous. Many fly first to other South American countries and then begin the overland trek, which inevitably includes confronting the notorious Darien Gap, the dense, lawless jungle separating Colombia and Panama. They face swamps, mountains, dangerous wildlife, and predatory criminal groups who exploit, rob, and assault vulnerable migrants. They do this not to chase wealth, but simply to survive, to find a place where they can feed their families, access basic health care, and live without constant fear. The Venezuelan exodus is a stark reminder of how quickly a nation can collapse and the extreme lengths people will go to escape a failed state. Further complicating the Central American migration picture is Nicaragua. Unlike countries primarily driven by gang violence or total economic collapse, the outflow from Nicaragua is significantly fueled by political repression under the authoritarian regime of President Daniel Ortega and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo. Once a figure of revolution, Ortega has consolidated power, systematically dismantling democratic institutions and silencing opposition. Following widespread protests in 2018, which were brutally suppressed by state forces and allied paramilitaries, the government has intensified its crackdown. Opposition leaders have been jailed or exiled, independent media outlets shuttered, non-governmental organizations banned, and even the Catholic Church has faced persecution, with priests being imprisoned and assets seized. Universities have been stripped of their autonomy, and critics face constant surveillance, harassment, and the threat of arbitrary arrest for treason or spreading fake news. This pervasive climate of fear has suffocated dissent and left many Nicaraguans feeling hopeless about their country's future. While economic hardship also plays a role, exacerbated by the political instability, the primary driver for many migrants is the escape from political persecution and the lack of basic freedoms. In 2023, over 164,000 Nicaraguans were intercepted at the U.S. border, a figure that has more than doubled compared to the previous year, indicating a rapidly escalating crisis. These are not typically people fleeing gang warfare. They are often students, journalists, activists, professionals, and ordinary citizens who fear for their safety and liberty under the Ortega-Murillo regime. They undertake the dangerous journey north through Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, facing the same risks as other Central American migrants: extortion, violence, and the perils of the Darien Gap if their route starts further south or involves transit through South America. The Nicaraguan situation underscores how authoritarianism and the erosion of democracy can become powerful catalysts for mass migration, creating refugees not from war in the traditional sense, but from the suppression of fundamental human rights by their own government. The silence emanating from Nicaragua isn't one of peace. It's one enforced by fear, driving its citizens towards perilous paths in search of freedom. In recent years, a new and alarming source of migration towards the U.S. border has emerged, catching many observers by surprise: Ecuador. Historically, Ecuador was more often a recipient of refugees, particularly from neighboring Colombia, and was considered relatively stable compared to other nations in the region. However, the country has rapidly descended into a state of narco-chaos, transforming it from a transit zone into a major battleground for powerful international drug cartels, particularly Mexican and Albanian crime syndicates vying for control of lucrative cocaine trafficking routes. This explosion of violence has shattered the nation's relative peace. Car bombings, prison riots with hundreds killed, assassinations of political figures, including a presidential candidate in 2023, and open warfare between gangs and the state have become terrifyingly commonplace, especially in coastal cities like Guayaquil, the main port. Drug lords now exert significant control over ports and prisons, which have become operational centers for criminal enterprises. Entire cities find themselves under siege, caught in the crossfire. In January 2024, the situation escalated dramatically when armed gangs stormed a live television broadcast, took over universities, and initiated coordinated attacks across the country, prompting the newly elected president to declare an internal armed conflict. While this violence grabs headlines, the underlying economic collapse is equally devastating for ordinary Ecuadorians. Unemployment is climbing sharply. Prices for basic goods are rising due to insecurity and disrupted supply chains, and fear paralyzes daily life. People are afraid to leave their homes, yet terrified to stay. Consequently, migration has surged. You'd be stunned to learn that in 2023 alone, over 100,000 Ecuadorians were apprehended at the U.S. border, a staggering increase, marking Ecuador as one of the fastest-growing sources of undocumented migration. These migrants, including young couples, teachers, teenagers, and even former police officers overwhelmed by the chaos, embark on the incredibly dangerous journey north. They travel through Colombia, often paying exorbitant fees to smugglers, and face the deadly Darien Gap jungle separating Colombia and Panama. This path is fraught with peril: mudslides, venomous snakes, bandits, and the constant threat of death. The fact that citizens from a country not long ago considered stable are now risking this green hell speaks volumes about the depth of the crisis. Ecuador's rapid descent into violence and economic despair highlights how quickly narco-trafficking can destabilize a nation, pushing its people onto the global migration map. The narrative surrounding migration from Colombia is often overshadowed by its neighbor, Venezuela, but it remains a significant and complex piece of the puzzle. For decades, Colombia was ravaged by internal armed conflict involving government forces, leftist guerrilla groups like the FARC and ELN, and right-wing paramilitary organizations, often fueled by the drug trade. While a landmark peace agreement was signed with the FARC in 2016, bringing a formal end to that specific conflict and earning then-President Juan Manuel Santos a Nobel Peace Prize, the path to lasting peace has been fraught with challenges. Peel back the surface layers of reported progress, and you'll find a country still grappling with significant violence and instability, particularly in rural areas. Dozens of splinter guerrilla groups, holdout factions from the FARC, the still active ELN, powerful drug cartels, and various criminal syndicates stepped into the power vacuum left by the demobilized FARC. These armed groups continue to battle for control over territory, illicit economies like coca production and illegal mining, and trafficking routes. Consequently, entire rural regions remain under the de facto control of these non-state actors. Coca production, the raw material for cocaine, remains at historically high levels, fueling conflict and corruption. Young people in impoverished regions are often faced with the stark choice: join an armed group or flee. Displacement within Colombia continues, and increasingly, Colombians are looking beyond their borders for safety and opportunity. Inflation has also crushed families, with food prices skyrocketing, making basic survival a daily struggle even in major cities like Medellin and Cali, pushing even middle-class Colombians towards poverty and the decision to migrate. You'd be shocked to know that over 130,000 Colombians were encountered at the U.S. southern border in 2023, a number that has tripled since 2021. This surge indicates that the comeback story hasn't reached everyone. While not driven by nationwide state collapse like Venezuela, the combination of persistent, albeit localized violence, lack of state presence in vast areas, forced recruitment, and severe economic hardship continues to push thousands onto the perilous migration trail north. Their route often involves crossing into Panama via the deadly Darien Gap, facing mudslides, snakes, bandits, and death, because what lies behind them, the complex web of violence and poverty, feels even more dangerous. Now we turn to Haiti, a nation engulfed in a crisis so profound it borders on complete state collapse. This isn't just a country in crisis. It's a country where the very concept of government has all but disappeared in large parts of the capital and beyond, leaving its people at the mercy of warring gangs and utter lawlessness. Decades of political instability, crippling poverty, corruption, foreign interference, and devastating natural disasters like the 2010 earthquake have culminated in a situation of almost unimaginable desperation. Law and order have effectively ceased to exist in significant portions of Port-au-Prince, the capital. It's not the police who maintain control, it's heavily armed gangs, often controlling entire districts, who operate like warlords. They dominate the streets, run the ports, and have even taken over police stations. They engage in open warfare with each other and the vastly outgunned National Police Force. Kidnapping for ransom is rampant, violence is endemic, and basic necessities are scarce. Schools are permanently closed in many areas due to the danger. Hospitals have been looted or abandoned, lacking staff, medicine, and even basic supplies. Even the United Nations and most international aid workers have been forced to significantly scale back operations or evacuate entirely due to the extreme security risks, leaving the population with virtually no external support system. The people left behind, ordinary Haitians, are trapped between relentless violence, crushing hunger, and absolute hopelessness. Finding food is a daily struggle, accessing clean water is a luxury, and safety is non-existent. In 2023 alone, despite the immense difficulties in even leaving the island nation, more than 126,000 Haitian migrants were encountered at the U.S. border. What makes their journey even more harrowing is that Haiti shares no land border with the U.S. or even mainland Central or South America. Most undertake perilous sea voyages in makeshift boats, often heading towards Florida or attempting landings in other Caribbean nations or Central America to begin an overland trek. Others manage to fly into South American countries like Brazil or Chile, countries that once welcomed them, but where anti-immigrant sentiment is now rising, pushing them out again. From there, they face the daunting task of traveling thousands of miles north, including the treacherous Darien Gap, a journey particularly brutal for those already weakened by malnutrition and trauma. Going back to Haiti is simply not an option when your old neighborhood is a war zone, when your family members might have been kidnapped or killed, and when your only choice appears to be flight or death. Haiti's situation represents an extreme case of state failure, where survival itself necessitates escaping the country by any means possible. Finally, we arrive at the most unexpected and rapidly growing source of illegal immigration to the United States: China. They were once perceived as the unlikeliest of border crossers, citizens of a global superpower, geographically distant, and seemingly removed from the typical drivers of migration seen in Latin America. Historically, Chinese nationals arriving at the U.S. border without authorization were a statistical anomaly. But now, they are arriving in record numbers, undertaking an astonishingly long, complex, and dangerous journey that highlights deep-seated issues within China itself. In 2023 alone, official figures show over 24,000 Chinese nationals were apprehended at the U.S. southern border. While this number might seem smaller compared to nations like Mexico or Venezuela, it represents an exponential increase, more than 10 times the number from just a few years prior. And this trend shows no sign of slowing down. So, what's compelling citizens of the world's second-largest economy to risk everything? It's not just about escaping political censorship or the fear of speaking freely against the Chinese Communist Party, although that is a factor for some. It goes deeper into economic disillusionment and social pressure. China's economy, while still large, is facing significant headwinds. Youth unemployment has exploded past 20%, leaving a generation of educated young people without work, purpose, or hope for the future they were promised. The real estate market, once considered the cornerstone of wealth accumulation for the middle class, is collapsing under mountains of debt, wiping out family savings invested in unfinished or overvalued properties. Entire ghost cities filled with empty apartment towers, built on speculation, now stand as monuments to broken economic dreams. Socially, the government's grip is tightening. Surveillance cameras monitor every step. Internet posts are tracked meticulously. Bank transactions are flagged, and dissent, however minor, can lead to serious consequences. People have vanished for criticizing the government, sometimes for mere tweets. This confluence of economic despair, lack of upward mobility, and suffocating political control is pushing many, including a surprising number of middle-class individuals, engineers, teachers, shop owners, people who once believed in China's future, to seek a life elsewhere. Their journey is extraordinary. Many fly into Ecuador, which conveniently offers visa-free entry to Chinese citizens. From there, they embark on the brutal overland trek north, joining migrants from across the globe. They traverse Colombia, brave the treacherous Darien Gap jungle alongside Haitians and Venezuelans, and navigate the cartel-controlled smuggling routes through Central America and Mexico. This isn't a fringe movement. It's a significant flow of people trading middle-class stability for a dangerous jungle path and the hope of breathing free air. when citizens of a global superpower risk death by snakebite, robbery, or drowning to escape their own country. It serves as a profound warning about the internal pressures building within that nation, a warning the world cannot afford to ignore. This isn't just about illegal immigration. It's about the fallout from economic stagnation, political repression, and the collapse of hope on a scale the world hasn't fully grasped. We've journeyed through 10 distinct nations, each with its unique story, yet bound by a common thread of desperation, pushing its citizens towards the U.S. border. From the cartel-dominated landscapes of Mexico and the gang-ruled streets of Honduras and Guatemala, to the state failure in Haiti, the economic collapse in Venezuela, the political oppression in Nicaragua and China, the emerging narco-chaos in Ecuador, and the lingering instability in Colombia and El Salvador, the reasons for migration are diverse and severe. It's clear this is no longer solely about seeking economic betterment. For many, it's a flight for survival, an escape from violence, persecution, or complete societal breakdown. People are undertaking journeys of unimaginable peril, traversing continents, facing jungles, deserts, and criminal predators, because the reality they leave behind is often perceived as even more dangerous. The surprising rise of migrants from distant nations like China and the continued flow from countries grappling with internal conflict or authoritarianism signal a complex global phenomenon. It underscores that instability, whether political, economic, or security-related, has far-reaching consequences, rippling across borders and continents. Addressing this requires more than just border policies. It demands a deeper understanding of the root causes, the violence, the poverty, the lack of governance, the absence of hope, that compel individuals and families to risk everything for a chance at safety and a future. What are your thoughts on this global shift in migration patterns? Which country's situation surprised you the most? Where are you watching from? Share your perspectives in the comments below. Engaging in thoughtful discussion helps us all understand these complex issues better. If this analysis provided valuable insights, please show your support by subscribing to our channel and giving this video a like. It significantly helps us reach a wider audience and continue our mission of exploring these critical global developments. Thank you for watching.